I think what's really important to stress here again is what these charities can and cannot do. So the charities that I sit on are able to go into these countries and actually provide band-aid solutions, intermediate solutions. They cannot provide jobs, which is where it's really important for us to see much more involvement in the private sector.
Burkina Faso has increased its rice production from 280,000 metric tons in 2022 to 326,000 metric tons in 2024, marking a dramatic shift in the country's agricultural capabilities. But here's where it gets interesting. Reports now suggest that instead of relying on USAID food aid, Burkina Faso is supplying rice to other African nations, a move that has left Washington stunned. How did a country once dependent on Western assistance transform into a regional food supplier? And why is this development sending shockwaves through U.S. foreign policy circles? Here, we would like to take a moment and thank you for supporting us and being a valued part of our strong community. And if you are not yet a member, we encourage you to join us and help build an even stronger community together. Let's get started. For decades, the United States Agency for International Development has been a dominant force in shaping food security policies across Africa. Marketed as a benevolent humanitarian initiative, USAID's food assistance programs have been presented as an essential lifeline for millions facing hunger and economic hardship. However, critics argue that beneath the surface, USAID has functioned as a tool of economic control, keeping African nations reliant on Western food supplies rather than fostering their agricultural independence. The model was straightforward. American farmers produced surplus crops, the U.S. government funded their shipment to Africa, and nations like Burkina Faso distributed them to local populations. At first glance, this seemed like a win-win. The U.S. kept its agricultural industry profitable, and African nations received free food aid. But there was a catch. By flooding African markets with cheap, imported food, USAID made it nearly impossible for local farmers to compete. Instead of strengthening domestic food production, these programs undermined local agriculture, leaving African nations perpetually dependent on foreign assistance. In Burkina Faso, the impact of USAID's presence was profound. The country, rich in arable land and a tradition of rice farming, saw its agricultural sector struggle to grow. Farmers couldn't compete with the subsidized grain arriving from the U.S., and local production remained stifled. This dependency meant that every year, thousands of tons of food were imported instead of being grown at home. Reports indicate that rather than investing in agricultural infrastructure, Burkina Faso's policies were shaped by the availability of Western food aid, creating a cycle of reliance that was difficult to break. Beyond agriculture, USAID's influence extended into policymaking. Recipients of U.S. food aid were often required to align with Washington's political and economic interests. African leaders who depended on aid found themselves under pressure to support U.S. foreign policy objectives, whether in trade negotiations, diplomatic stances, or security alliances. The consequence was clear. USAID did not simply provide food, it bought influence, ensuring that African nations remained tethered to a global system where the U.S. held the upper hand. This system continued for decades, with little incentive for change. Why invest in large-scale agricultural projects when free food is arriving each year? Why push for self-sufficiency when a dependency has been institutionalized? For many African governments, USAID was the easy solution to food insecurity. But beneath the surface, this aid was a double-edged sword, keeping nations in a vulnerable position where they were unable to dictate their own economic and agricultural futures. However, the cracks in this system began to appear when U.S. President Donald Trump's administration took a different stance on foreign aid. Trump viewed food assistance programs as a burden on American taxpayers and sought to reduce U.S. spending on Africa, a move that included cutting USAID's budget for food shipments. This decision sent shockwaves across the continent, forcing many nations, including Burkina Faso, to confront an uncomfortable reality. What happens when the aid runs out? For Burkina Faso, The answer came in the form of a radical shift under Ibrahim Traoré. Rather than pleading for USAID to resume operations, Traoré reportedly turned the crisis into an opportunity, prioritizing domestic food production over foreign assistance. His administration focused on mechanizing agriculture, expanding rice farms, and ensuring that Burkina Faso would never again be at the mercy of external donors. The story of Burkina Faso's transformation is not simply about rice production or food self-sufficiency. It is a calculated and deliberate rejection of Western economic control, a move that has sent shockwaves through the very system that once ensured African nations remained dependent. What Captain Ibrahim Traoré is doing is more than agricultural reform. It is a radical restructuring of power in the region. While previous governments in Burkina Faso managed agriculture under the assumption that external assistance was a permanent necessity, Traoré has reportedly flipped this logic on its head. His government is not merely replacing USAID's role with local rice production. It is actively dismantling the structural dependencies that kept the country under the influence of foreign donors. In doing so, he is not just securing food security for his people, he is carving out a new economic identity for Burkina Faso, one that no longer answers to Washington or Paris. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. This transformation was not an act of desperation, but a meticulously planned effort to use USAID's departure as a strategic turning point. The timing was not coincidental. Many African nations faced food insecurity as a result of Washington's aid cuts, but only Traoré saw it as an opportunity rather than a crisis. This was a defining moment. The choice was either to beg for USAID to return or to ensure that it was never needed again. Traoré chose the latter. Many argue that this shift goes beyond rice production. It is about who controls Africa's economic resources. Historically, food aid programs like USAID operated under the guise of generosity, but their deeper function was to secure economic influence. A country that depends on foreign food shipments does not negotiate trade agreements on its terms. It does not dictate its financial policies. It does not challenge the global order controlled by Western powers. But Burkina Faso, under Traoré, is reportedly positioning itself outside of this system. By eliminating food dependency, the country is achieving something far more profound: political leverage. If Burkina Faso's rice industry is no longer tied to U.S. aid, then neither are its policies. If its food supply is locally controlled, then so is its diplomatic freedom. It is this broader shift, not just the rice exports, that is reportedly worrying policymakers in the West. A self-sufficient Burkina Faso is immune to the pressure tactics that once kept it in line. With this newfound economic autonomy, Burkina Faso has begun taking a more assertive role in African trade, strengthening regional partnerships while minimizing reliance on Western imports. This change is being closely watched by neighboring nations, particularly Mali and Niger, both of which have also taken steps to reduce Western economic control. If Traoré's agricultural model succeeds, it could serve as a template for a larger movement across Africa, one that challenges the very foundation of how foreign aid has been used as a tool of influence. What makes this shift even more remarkable is how quickly it has unfolded. Burkina Faso has not waited for permission, external validation, or foreign investment. It has taken control of its trajectory on its terms. In a region where Western-backed financial institutions often dictate economic policies, this defiance is nothing short of revolutionary. The real question now is whether Burkina Faso's rise as a self-sufficient economic power will be allowed to continue. Historically, any African nation that has attempted to assert full economic independence from the West has faced backlash, political, economic, and sometimes even military. If Burkina Faso's success continues, it may not just challenge USAID's role in Africa, it could reshape the balance of power on the continent. The world is watching. But more importantly, Africa is watching. If Burkina Faso succeeds, more nations will do the same. While many leaders across Africa have spoken of self-sufficiency, Ibrahim Traoré has delivered actual results. His strategy was never about short-term fixes or symbolic gestures. It was designed to create a system that runs independently of Western aid, ensuring that Burkina Faso does not just survive without USAID, but thrives in its absence. This vision is already paying off, with Burkina Faso's economy witnessing tangible improvements, its agricultural sector experiencing record growth, and its trade partnerships strengthening across West Africa. One of the clearest indicators of success is the surge in domestic rice production, which has already exceeded expectations. Just a few years ago, Burkina Faso was heavily reliant on imported rice, struggling to meet domestic demand. Now, thanks to Traore's aggressive investment in irrigation, mechanization, and seed improvement, Burkina Faso has transformed itself into a net exporter of rice. This surplus has allowed the country to supply rice to regional partners like Mali, Niger, and Guinea, effectively replacing Western food imports with locally grown alternatives. While much of the attention surrounding Ibrahim Traoré's leadership has been focused on Burkina Faso's rapid rise in rice production, the deeper transformation is unfolding in a far broader economic strategy. Traoré's vision does not simply revolve around food security. It is a bold plan to redefine how Burkina Faso interacts with the global economy. His administration has committed to breaking the historic cycle of resource exploitation, where Africa's wealth in raw materials has benefited foreign corporations while leaving local economies stagnant. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso is shifting toward full-scale industrialization, ensuring that its resources are not just extracted, but processed and refined within the country. A move that could change its economic future forever. For decades, Burkina Faso, like many African nations, exported its raw materials at low prices while importing expensive finished products, a trade imbalance that has bled African economies dry. Traoré's administration has made it clear that this model must end. If Burkina Faso is to thrive, it must control every stage of production, from cultivation to processing to distribution. Reports indicate that this policy shift is already being implemented, with strategic industrial investments aimed at keeping economic value within the country. The centerpiece of this shift is a push to develop domestic processing industries, starting with the agriculture and mining sectors, which have historically been the backbone of Burkina Faso's economy. One of the most critical projects in this industrialization drive is the construction of a state-of-the-art tomato processing facility, an initiative that is already reshaping Burkina Faso's approach to agriculture, employment, and economic self-reliance. The country has invested $8.1 million into this project, a sum that reflects the government's commitment to ending its dependence on imported tomato paste and canned products, which have historically flooded African markets at the expense of local farmers. Burkina Faso has long been a major producer of tomatoes, yet without the infrastructure to process them, much of this produce went to waste or was exported as raw goods, only to return as expensive finished products from foreign-owned industries. This new facility, however, flips that equation entirely. By processing tomatoes within Burkina Faso itself, the country is not only reducing waste and boosting domestic production, but also keeping more of the profits within its borders. This shift is about more than just food. It is about economic sovereignty. Instead of being at the mercy of foreign suppliers for processed food products, Burkina Faso is building its value chains and creating jobs for farmers, factory workers, and local entrepreneurs. Reports indicate that the plant is expected to process thousands of tons of tomatoes annually, ensuring that Burkina Faso not only meets its demand, but can also begin exporting finished products to neighboring African nations. But Traoré's ambition extends beyond agriculture. Another game-changing project is Burkina Faso's first-ever gold refinery, a move that could permanently shift the balance of power in the country's mining sector. For years, Burkina Faso's gold wealth has been plundered by multinational corporations, which have extracted raw gold, refined it abroad, and then sold it back at massive profits. This system, where African nations serve as mere sources of raw materials, while the real economic benefits are reaped overseas, has kept Burkina Faso in a position of economic weakness. Traoré's administration has made it clear that this era is coming to an end. The government has announced the construction of a gold refinery with the capacity to process 400 kilograms of gold per day, a move that will allow Burkina Faso to refine its gold and sell it directly on global markets. This refinery is not just a financial investment, it is a declaration of independence. By controlling its gold processing, Burkina Faso will no longer be at the mercy of foreign buyers who dictate prices and terms. Instead, the country will set its economic policies, collect more revenue from its natural resources, and reinvest in its development. Beyond agriculture and mining, reports suggest that Traore's administration is exploring further industrial expansion, with plans to modernize manufacturing, textiles, and energy production. The ultimate goal is clear. Burkina Faso must stop being a supplier of raw materials and start being a producer of finished goods. This is a fundamental shift in African economic thinking, one that, if successful, could inspire similar movements across the continent. By prioritizing industrialization alongside agricultural reform, Traoré is ensuring that Burkina Faso's economy does not just grow, it evolves. This strategy is not just about making Burkina Faso wealthier, but about making it self-sustaining, removing the need for reliance on Western-dominated global supply chains. If this model succeeds, it could permanently reshape Burkina Faso's place in the world economy, proving that African nations can control their resources, define their futures, and prosper on their own terms. The transformation taking place in Burkina Faso is being watched closely by other African nations. Reports suggest that Mali and Niger, both of which have also moved away from Western economic control, are closely monitoring Burkina Faso's rice supply strategy. If successful, this approach could serve as a model for other African nations looking to break free from aid dependency and build sustainable local economies. Some analysts believe that this shift could inspire a new era of self-reliance across the Sahel region, where Western aid has traditionally played a dominant role. The reaction from the US and its allies, however, remains uncertain. Some sources suggest that the decline of USAID's role in Burkina Faso is a sign of America's weakening influence in Africa. With growing economic ties between African nations and an increasing push for self-sufficiency, the traditional Western model of engagement, through aid and dependency, may be losing its grip. Analysts argue that this could force a re-evaluation of US policies in Africa, as countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger opt to build economic relationships within the continent rather than looking to the West. There is also a broader geopolitical aspect to this shift. The ability of Burkina Faso to supply food to its neighbors raises an important question. Can Africa sustain itself without foreign aid? While some argue that cutting ties with Western donors is risky and could lead to short-term economic difficulties, others believe that this is precisely the kind of bold move Africa needs to make to assert its economic independence. If Burkina Faso continues on this trajectory and successfully sustains its food and industrial independence, it may set a precedent that other African leaders will be eager to follow. So, Ibrahim Traoré's leadership is reshaping Burkina Faso's economy, marking a shift from dependency on foreign aid to self-sufficiency and regional economic cooperation. While USAID's exit from Burkina Faso's food supply chain may have initially seemed like a setback, it has in many ways become an opportunity. The country's ability to not only feed itself but also supply rice to neighboring nations is a strong indicator that this shift is more than just a political statement. It is an economic transformation. This moment could prove to be a defining chapter in Africa's economic history. With Burkina Faso taking the lead, other nations may soon follow, signaling the potential decline of Western aid influence on the continent. The question remains, will this movement spread across Africa, or will external pressures force a return to the old ways? If Burkina Faso's trajectory continues as planned, the future may belong not to those who rely on aid, but to those who take control of their resources and define their economic destiny. Do you think anything can stop Africa? What will happen if it finally ends its dependence on the West? Let us know in the comments section. Will Africa be prosperous again? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.